The smell hit him first. Not rot. Not quite. Something older than death but not yet gone. Like the breath of a forgotten cellar, or the back of a prayer book that hadn't been opened in years. Dust and dried blood, soaked into grain. Elias Cole stepped through the leaning doorway of the old granary with his shotgun loose in hand, the barrel down, his fingers curled more from habit than intent. The air inside was thick, unmoving, like it had forgotten how to carry sound. The mid-morning sun cut through a broken slat above, catching dust motes that hovered like suspended ash. He paused, stilled. A shape, slumped against a post, legs bent wrong, hair matted with filth and straw. He took one step, then another. She was bound at the wrists with wire, the kind used for fencing. One strand twisted around the beam behind her. Her boots were gone. One foot bled from a long, deep split along the arch. Dried crimson stained the dirt beneath her. She wasn't dead. Elias crouched, his knees cracking loud in the silence. The girl's breath fluttered, barely there. Lips cracked, skin gray from cold or blood loss. But her eyes, when they opened, they locked on him like a hawk spotting something in the grass. Not fear, not yet, not trust either. He didn't speak. Words had no place here, not in the dust, not with the way she looked at him like he was another ghost in a place full of them. Instead, he took out his pocket knife, flicked it open with a thumb worn smooth by time, and reached for the wire. She flinched. His hand stopped. He let her see his face. The weathered lines, the beard gone to white, the eyes tired, but still watching. "I ain't here to hurt you," he said, though his voice was dry enough to crack. No answer. He cut the wire. Slow, deliberate. She didn't cry out, even when it tugged at scabbed-over skin, even when her arm slumped down and she bit her lip until it bled. That's when he saw it. Along the inside of her left arm, just above the wrist, carved in skin and still weeping blood. She knew their sin. Each letter was jagged, angry, carved by hand with something cruel and dull. Elias stared at it like a preacher stares at fire come down from heaven. A tremble ran up his spine, not from fear, from recognition. He'd buried a woman once with a mark just as hateful carved into her back. Not words, just slashes. 3 of them. His wife. That had been 10 winters ago, maybe 11. Time was a slow dripping poison in the desert. It dulled things, faces, voices, but not pain. That stayed sharp. He reached under her shoulders and lifted her. Light, too light, like carrying a sack of dead birds. Her head rolled against his chest, but she didn't protest. She was past protesting. Outside, the sun was a white sheet nailed to the sky. The cabin wasn't far, 2 ridges over, an hour's walk. He carried her like something sacred, not because she was innocent, but because someone wanted her gone. And in the West, that usually meant she had something worth saving. The final line stilled in Elias's chest like a prayer unspoken. She knew their sin, and now so did he. The girl wouldn't speak, not when he asked her name, not when he pressed the edge of a warm cloth to her split foot, not even when he pulled a splinter of rusted wire from the raw skin behind her elbow. She just watched him, eyes wide, dry, and quiet as old stone. Outside, the wind scraped against the shuttered windows like dry hands on coffin wood. The cabin creaked in its bones. Elias had seen worse storms in Texas, but something in this one stirred uneasy in his gut. A silence too thick, a pressure behind the ears like a warning not yet spoken. He knelt by the hearth, coaxing the flame from a bundle of mesquite bark and the last page of an old hymn book. The fire caught slow, unwilling, but it came alive. Pale orange light danced across the cracked floorboards and kissed the girl's face in flickers. She flinched at the pop of sap in the wood. "Won't hurt you," he said again, softer this time. No answer, just the sound of her breathing, slow, shallow, like she didn't trust the air to stay clean long. Elias stirred the pot above the fire. Thin rabbit stew, barely enough to float a sliver of onion. He'd caught it that morning in a snare near the dry creek bed. Now it was all he had to give. He poured a cup and knelt before her, one knee popping. She didn't reach. "You're gonna eat," he said, "or I will." Still nothing. He set the tin cup down beside her, close enough she could smell it. The warmth reached her fingers, but she didn't move. Only when he turned his back did he hear the faint scrape of tin across wood. He didn't turn. He just let the silence hold. Night came slow in these parts. The stars crawled across the sky like cautious scouts. Coyotes howled once far off, then stopped, as if they too were holding breath. Elias sat in his rocker near the window, shotgun across his lap, boots muddy, soul heavier. He watched the girl curled on the cot, a blanket draped over her like a shroud. She hadn't spoken a single word in 3 hours. But her eyes never closed. He saw that, and he saw something else too. When she shifted, the sleeve of his old coat fell back from her wrist, and there it was again, like a brand burned into his own conscience. She knew their sin. He couldn't stop thinking about the carving, about the way each letter bled like confession, the angle of it, the rage. Someone had done that to silence her, but they hadn't killed her. Why? It didn't add up. The Calebs of the world didn't leave witnesses. They buried them deep or let the buzzards do it, which meant something else was coming. Some unfinished business, a reckoning not yet reached. He stood slowly, walked over to the chest at the foot of the cot, and opened it. Inside lay an old book, his wife's Bible, now wrapped in oilskin and untouched for years. He placed it on the table, stared at it like a man staring at a gravestone. Then he took a small box from beneath the Bible and opened it. A revolver, cold steel, oiled and ready. He set it beside the fire. When he turned, the girl was looking at him, not just glancing now, but watching. Still, she said nothing, but her eyes spoke something else entirely. She wasn't just afraid. She was preparing. Out in the dark, something shifted. A bird took flight too fast. A tree creaked with no wind. Elias stood at the window, eyes narrowed into the black. Somewhere beyond the ridge, trouble stirred. He felt it like a splinter beneath the skin, and in the fire's glow, the words on her arm seemed to burn fresh again, as if someone, somewhere, still needed reminding of what she saw. She spoke just before dawn, not with a warning, not with a plea, just 3 words, rasped through cracked lips and into the dark like a prayer to no God. They were laughing. Elias had been at the stove, spooning out the last of the rabbit stew into 2 chipped bowls. He didn't turn, didn't flinch, but his hand stopped mid-stir, and the silence in the cabin deepened like a held breath. The fire crackled once, sharp as a pistol shot. He turned slowly, spoon still in hand. Her eyes were on the floorboards, on a knot in the wood she hadn't stopped staring at since he'd carried her in. Her voice came again, softer now, but it carried. They laughed after they shot him, like boys do after pulling a cruel prank. Elias said nothing. He didn't need to. The room was already full of ghosts. She reached for the bowl he'd left on the crate beside her cot, held it in both hands like it might vanish if she blinked. He had a Bible in his lap, she said. Didn't raise a hand, just sat there, told him they were sick men, that their hearts were hollow. Caleb shot him in the neck, not the chest, the neck. She took a shaky breath. A spoonful passed her lips. She didn't seem to taste it. Elias sat on the chair by the hearth, the wood groaning under his weight. The revolver rested on the table beside him, cleaned, loaded, ready. Her voice didn't tremble. That was the strange part. It didn't weep or shake, just dry and measured, like she'd already told the story 1,000 times in her head, and now the telling was just another part of survival. There was a wagon, covered. I was under it. They didn't know I'd gone back to grab the canteen. I heard everything. Heard the women scream. Heard the girl choke on blood. She couldn't have been more than 16. Elias's jaw tightened. His gaze drifted to the window, still dark outside. The sky not yet shifting. The kind of dark that held everything in place. 3 men, she said. Caleb. One with a scar down his cheek. One missing half a finger. That last detail brought a flicker of life to her face. Not rage, not sorrow, just memory. I watched them dump the bodies in a ravine east of Devil's Spine, 6 of them. Then they started loading rifles and coin into Caleb's wagon like they were stocking shelves. Elias nodded once. Then they found me. A pause. They didn't kill me, just smiled like they knew something I didn't. Caleb said he wanted me to remember. Said memory was the best kind of prison. She turned her wrist slowly, showing him the scabbed over words again. She knew their sin. They carved it into me like it'd hold the truth in place. Elias stared at the wound, then passed it beyond her, beyond the cabin to something not yet arrived but already circling. The stew grew cold in both their bowls. You tell anyone else? He asked. No one left, she said. They made sure of it. A gust of wind hit the window pane, then sharp, rattling. Dry leaves skittered across the roof like bones dragged over tin. In the distance, a horse cried once, then silence. Elias rose, picked up the revolver, and slipped it into his coat pocket. You believe me? She asked finally, her voice barely a whisper. He turned to her, eyes hard as the land outside. I don't need to. Out here, when a name like Caleb Shaw walks free, the lie ain't whether he did it. It's how many bodies he left behind that never got counted. She found the Bible before he could hide it. It was just past dawn, a dull gray bleeding through the cabin window. Elias had gone to check the snares near the arroyo, and when he returned, he found her sitting at the table, the leather-bound book resting in her lap like something fragile and burning. Her fingers traced the worn cover like a question she didn't want answered. "You a preacher?" she asked without looking up. Elias set the snares down beside the door. One rabbit, one empty loop. She turned a page slowly. The sound was dry, papery, like old leaves being crushed underfoot. "What changed?" Elias didn't answer right away. He moved to the stove, threw another log on the fire. Sparks jumped like startled ghosts. "I buried my wife and 2 boys in a ditch just outside San Alamo. That's what changed." The wind stirred outside, but only lightly. The kind of wind that doesn't cool or carry it, just shifts dust from one forgotten corner to another. She looked up. "How'd they die?" He poured coffee into 2 tin mugs, slid one her way. Men came through on the way to nowhere, wanted food, guns, women. A long silence. Then, "You weren't there?" "I was reading the Gospel of Mark to a dying ranch hand, 15 miles out." He sat across from her, the chair groaning beneath his weight. "When I came back, the barn was still burning. The bodies weren't much more than smoke." He didn't cry when he said it. His voice didn't break, just flattened like a man too tired to mourn, but too human to forget. The girl closed the Bible gently, placed it on the table. "They carved something into your wife?" He nodded. 3 slashes, across her back, like a tally, like she was just another count. She exhaled through her nose, a sound not quite pity. "You think it was him?" she asked. "Caleb?" Elias didn't blink. "Wouldn't surprise me." They sat in silence for a long time, not the uncomfortable kind, the kind that stretched between 2 people who understood that words were just another form of noise. Outside, a hawk cried once and went quiet. The girl stood and moved toward the fire, blanket still wrapped tight around her shoulders. "You still believe?" she asked. "In God?" Elias stared into the flames like a man reading some other scripture. "I believe he ain't come around these parts in a long time." She nodded, not in agreement, but in recognition. "Maybe he's scared." Elias gave a soft grunt. "If he's got sense, he ought to be." That night, after she'd gone to sleep, Elias stepped out onto the porch. The wind was dry and mean. The stars above didn't twinkle, they just watched, cold and still. He looked out toward the ridgeline, where the land broke into jagged teeth. Something out there moved, but not close, not yet. A shadow against a darker shadow. He didn't reach for the rifle. Not tonight. He just stood there, letting the wind coat him in silence. And in that silence, he wondered if judgment came only after death, or if, out here, men like him had to carry it on their backs while still breathing. The first sign was the rabbit skinned and strung up wrong. Elias found it hanging from a cedar limb near his trapline, chest slit open, the meat left to spoil, not the work of a predator, not a man hungry either. This was message work. He studied the ground, no boot prints, just wind-smeared impressions, broken twigs, and a single heel mark that stopped short like someone had stood there, waiting, then vanished back into the brush. He took the rabbit down, buried it under stones, and didn't speak a word on the way back to the cabin. But something in his gait had changed. Slower, heavier, like a man walking uphill, with more than weight on his shoulders. The girl was sitting on the porch, sharpening a rusted knife with the edge of a horseshoe nail. Her grip wasn't right, her eyes were. She looked up as he approached. "Something wrong?" Elias opened the door without answering, stepped inside, and unlatched the chest at the foot of his cot. She followed him in, silent as shadow. He pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle, set it on the table, and unrolled it. A long-barreled Winchester, scarred stock, cold iron. The girl stared at it, then at him. "You ever used that?" Elias didn't look up. "Not since my boys died." He checked the action, thumbed the lever slow. The click echoed in the room like the tick of an old clock restarting. "I think it's time I remembered how." They spent the day in silence, preparing. She gathered water from the creek. He chopped mesquite wood until his palms split. She patched a hole in the shutter. He counted bullets. At sundown, he took her out back and handed her the knife. "Show me," he said. She held it too tight, blade angled wrong. He adjusted her fingers, gently, like he was handling something delicate, not because she was, but because the last time he taught someone to fight, it had been his youngest boy with a stick in a churchyard. "Don't grip like you're scared of it," he said. "Grip like you own it." She nodded, then lunged, clumsy but committed. He sidestepped, tapped her shoulder. Again. By the 5th time, she cut air sharp. By the 7th, he saw it in her eyes. Not fear, Not rage, purpose. That night, they sat by the fire, the rifle leaning against the wall beside Elias, the knife tucked under her blanket. Neither of them spoke for a long while. Then she said, "They're coming, aren't they?" Elias sipped his coffee, stared into the orange glow. Not tonight, but soon. A coyote howled in the dark. Another answered closer this time. She pulled the blanket tighter. "If they come, I ain't running." He nodded. "Didn't figure you would." She looked at him, eyes reflecting firelight and something harder beneath it. "You think we got a chance?" Elias set his tin cup down slow. "In the West," he said, "a chance is the best a soul can ask for." Outside, the wind picked up. The sand whispered against the walls like it was trying to speak through wood. Elias stood and checked the lock on the door. Then he checked it again. Somewhere beyond the ridgeline, the men who carved her arm were stirring. And this time they wouldn't leave a message. They'd come to erase one. It started with the crows. 3 of them, circling wide over the ridgeline come morning. No sound, just their black wings slicing the sky. Elias watched them from the porch, one boot propped on the step, his rifle balanced across his knees. The sky was the color of old bone, and the air tasted like flint sharp, dry, metallic. Something in his chest tightened. The girl stepped out behind him, tying her hair back with a strip of torn cloth. She didn't ask what he saw. She didn't need to. She saw it too, the way the wind shifted, dragging dust behind it like a curtain pulled too slow. A signal. "They're close," she said. He nodded. "How many?" "Can't say yet, but the land's spooked." She sat beside him, her knife in her lap, eyes narrowed at the far ridge. They waited. By noon, the first shape broke the horizon, just a flicker of movement against the yellow sky. Then another, then 3 more. Riders, slow, spaced, confident. Too confident. They weren't scouting. They were coming. Elias stood, walked inside, and checked the Winchester again. He ran a cloth through the barrel, not because it needed it, but because his hands needed something to do. She was behind him, pacing like a caged fox. Not nervous, just caged. "We stay?" she asked. "We stay." She looked to the window, then down to her arm, the words still scarred across her skin like dried ink. "Then we better make it cost 'em." They moved together, wordless, the kind of rhythm born not from training, but from shared silence. She poured lamp oil across the windowsill just in case. He loaded shells, each one checked twice. She stacked firewood waist-high behind the porch rail. He nailed the shutter above the kitchen. There was no panic, no trembling, just motion. Deliberate, heavy, like they were setting the table for something solemn. By late afternoon, the dust line reached the lower basin. 5 riders now, close enough to count the horses. One of them, heavyset, hunched forward with a limp shoulder, the one with the scar down his cheek. Another wore a red scarf tied tight around his neck. And the one in the center, tall, broad-backed, easy in the saddle, Caleb Shaw. Even from this distance, Elias could feel it, the same way you feel thunder before it speaks. "They're not gonna knock," the girl said. "No," Elias replied, "they ain't." Inside the cabin, he pulled down a box wrapped in oiled cloth. From it, he drew a scattergun, double-barreled, brutal, honest. He set it by the door. Then he did something he hadn't done in 11 years. He pulled his wife's Bible from beneath the cot and opened it to the page she'd dog-eared long ago. Ecclesiastes, chapter 3. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. He didn't speak the words, but he read them, and he let them sit. The sun dipped low. The dust hung thick. The hoofbeats hadn't started yet, but the ground already felt like it remembered them. Elias stepped onto the porch. The girl stood beside him, knife tucked into her belt, gaze locked on the horizon. "They're coming straight," she said, not hiding it. "No reason to," he replied. "They don't think we'll fight." She almost smiled. "Then let's make 'em regret thinking." As the wind kicked up red earth and the sun bled into the sky, Elias felt something shift deep inside. Not hope, not fear, but the slow, grim certainty that some prayers were meant to be answered with gunfire. They came just after sundown. The first hoofbeat cracked like bone against dry rock. Then another, then the creak of leather, slow and deliberate, as 5 horses pushed through the haze of red dusk. Inside the cabin, Elias stood by the door, shotgun in hand, breath low and measured. The girl crouched behind the stove, fingers wrapped around the knife hilt. Her lips moved, but no words came out. Just a breathless rhythm. Inhale, hold, exhale, hold again. The wind had died. No rustle in the brush, no howl from the canyon. just dust, thick and floating like old smoke. Elias moved first. He opened the door slow, let it creak once, let them hear it. A step onto the porch, then another. The boards gave way under his boots, groaning from years of wear. He didn't flinch. 3 of them dismounted. The one in the center stayed on his horse. Broad shoulders, black hat, a smirk beneath the shadow. Caleb Shaw. Elias saw the shape of a pistol at his hip, saw the way his fingers flex slow, like a man stretching before a prayer. The 2 others spread wide, flank positions, trained, loose, dangerous. Elias took one breath through his nose, and it filled with the scent of iron and sweat, and something sour like death that hadn't been buried yet. The first man drew. The shotgun roared. A spray of fire, thick and blinding. The man dropped like a felled bull, his head snapped back, legs kicked twice, then stopped. The second came from the right, low and fast, revolver out. But the girl was faster. She sprang from the shadows like a memory made flesh, her knife flashing under the firelight. One step, then another, then a sharp twist of her wrist under the ribs, straight in. The man gasped, a wet sound. His gun clattered across the floorboards. She didn't look at him again. Then silence, the kind that presses against the skull. Too much for birds, too heavy for wind. Caleb Shaw dismounted slow, not rushed, not afraid, just sure. He stepped forward, one boot sinking into the blood-soft earth where his man had fallen. Elias lowered the shotgun. Empty. He dropped it, let it fall with the weight of a finished sermon. Caleb drew, fast, mean, but Elias was already moving shoulder low, charging like a hammer through dry wheat. They collided hard, fists and knees and elbows all tangled in heat and breath. The girl ran toward them, the knife still slick in her hand. Caleb shoved Elias back, swung wild, caught him across the jaw. Elias stumbled. Caleb turned. Too slow. The girl drove the blade in from behind, between the ribs. He buckled. No scream, just surprise. He dropped to his knees. Elias stepped forward, chest heaving, blood at the corner of his mouth. He took the knife from her hand and finished it. By full dark, the fire burned steady again. 3 bodies lay still under the sky, their shadows long and broken. The girl dug with a shovel that used to belong to Elias's boy. Elias worked beside her, each strike of the blade into dirt a sentence unspoken. The graves weren't neat. They didn't need to be. They just needed to be deep enough. Later, after the last of the red earth was packed down, Elias stood alone by the porch. The girl sat on the steps, eyes fixed on the horizon, where the dust had finally settled. The wind picked up, soft, almost skinned, but the silence still held. Not the kind that waits, the kind that knows. And as the night wrapped around them, the cabin stood a little smaller, the world a little quieter, but inside both their chests, something had opened that would never fully close again. The air smelled of turned earth and burnt gunpowder. Not fresh anymore, not dangerous either, just lingering, like grief that hadn't yet settled into memory. She stirred the fire with the butt of the shovel, half buried in the ashes of last night's flames. Sparks leapt up, danced once, then vanished into the dim light. The sun was trying to rise, but clouds held it back. Just a sliver broke through the trees, narrow, golden, trembling on the cabin floor like something holy that didn't quite belong here. Inside, Elias sat at the table with a cloth pressed to his jaw. The bruise from Caleb's fist had begun to color, purple edging into blue. His knuckles were cracked, one fingernail bent black with blood. The girl sat across from him, elbows on the table, chin resting on clasped hands. No words passed between them, but something had changed. Some line drawn in silence had softened overnight. She reached across the table, just 2 fingers, light on his wrist. Not affection, not apology, recognition. They buried the bloodied clothes in a patch of scrub behind the stable, lit them with a matchstick, and watched them curl into smoke. Neither spoke. They didn't have to. The act itself was the sentence. The cabin had taken its scars, bullet splinters in the porch post, a blackened scrape on the floor from the struggle, a crack in the back window pane, but it still stood. So did they. Elias cleaned the shotgun with slow, thoughtful care. His hands knew the motions, but his eyes were elsewhere, far, maybe 10 years back, maybe more. Somewhere between a churchyard and a woman's laughter that no longer had a voice. The girl stepped outside, barefoot in the morning dust, and leaned against the doorframe. She looked thinner somehow, and stronger. She watched the trees. The birds didn't sing. Not yet, but the wind had started again. Not harsh, Not cruel, just enough to stir the grass and rustle the branches like the land itself was exhaling. She walked to the graves. 3 of them, uneven, fresh. The mounds were neat now, each marked with a stone, no names, no words, just weight. She didn't pray. She crouched and ran her fingers over the red dust, now hardened with sun. A sound behind her footsteps. Soft, familiar. Elias joined her, hands in his pockets, jaw still set but not clenched. They stood side by side in the golden slant between the trees. Still no words, but the silence no longer felt like a wound. That night they ate in silence. Rabbit again, thin broth, but the air felt different. The fire's warmth reached a little deeper into the wood. Afterward, Elias reached into his coat pocket and placed something on the table. The girl stared at it. A silver cross. Small, weathered, bent at one end. He didn't explain. She didn't ask. She just picked it up, closed her hand around it, and held it to her chest for a long moment, then set it beside her knife. Outside, the stars returned. The trees swayed gentle in the night. The porch creaked with wind, not weight. Elias watched from the window, one hand resting on the frame, the other on the Bible, closed but no longer hidden. And somewhere in the quiet, beneath the weight of all that was lost, a sliver of tomorrow found its place between the trees. The sun was already high when they packed what little they had. A saddlebag, a rifle, a pouch of dried meat, 1 canteen, the knife, the cross. The Bible stayed behind. The cabin, too. Elias stood in the doorway one last time, hand on the frame where the wood still bore a bullet groove from Caleb's first shot. He traced it with his thumb, then stepped back and closed the door. No key. No lock. Just finality. The girl waited beside the mule, one boot resting lightly against the stirrup. Her face was calm, but her eyes kept scanning the trail ahead, not for danger, but for decision. The air was dry, still, not even the buzz of flies near the graves. They didn't mark the trail with words. Just footsteps. Just the crunch of dust under leather and the creak of weathered straps. They passed the ridge by midday, the land unfolding before them like a long exhale, vast, unforgiving, indifferent. No road, just direction. South, toward nothing they could name. Behind them, the cabin disappeared into the haze. Elias didn't look back. She did once. Only once. By sundown, they came to a dry riverbed, cracked and scattered with bone-white stone. They sat beneath a twisted mesquite tree, eating in silence, sharing the same tin cup of water. The fire they built was small, careful, meant more for comfort than warmth. Above them, stars blinked into place like slow truths. No wind, no sound, just breath and firelight. He pulled out the old tin of tobacco, tapped some into his palm, and rolled a thin smoke with practiced hands. She leaned back against the saddlebag, eyes half-lidded. Still alert, always alert. Later, when the fire had fallen to embers, she said, "We gonna keep running?" Elias let the smoke trail from his lips before answering. "Number." "Then what?" He glanced at her, saw the scar still etched into her arm, though it had begun to fade. Just a line now, a memory trying to soften. "We're not running. We're just not waiting anymore." She nodded, didn't speak again. Neither did he. Morning came slow, the horizon a line of burning gold. They saddled up without a word. The dust rose behind them like ghost trails, fading fast. Back at the cabin, the door creaked in the wind. One shutter swung loose, tapping against the wall like a hand trying to be remembered. Inside, the ashes in the hearth cooled. The 3 graves behind the shed sat untouched. And carved into the back of the porch post, shallow and crude, were 5 words cut by knife tip, fresh and uneven. She knew their sin. Now the land did too.